We spent a lot of time with deformers in this chapter, and there's so many things we could do. Frankly, there could be an entire training course just on deformers. I just want to show you one more way you can use deformers. Just show you the tool, really, not so much a tutorial. But let me jump over here and add a cube. Just shift-click to add a cube. One thing we haven't talked about yet is replicators, but we can do it now. What a replicator does, it allows us to generate multiple copies of an item really easily. And one thing that's new in modo601 is the particle generator. Now, I'm going to talk about particles soon in another chapter, but quickly, particles in here are not quite what you think as far as a particle generating system like in Lightwave or Cinema 4D, where you can push and pull and generate these particles. They're put here more so that you can attach things to them. And they're very, very useful, but it's not so much a generator in the traditional sense of other programs. So let me show you what I mean. So if I come down here and I say particle generator, all right, we get just a very simple, we get a count and a length. And if I do 10 and then 0 on the Y, and then maybe 10 on there. All right, so we have a particle generator. What can we do with this? Well, obviously, you might even gotten to this point like, I don't see anything, it doesn't work. That's because it works with other tools. So let's go and add from duplication a replicator. All right. Now what I can do in the replicator is use the particle generator to replicate the cube. So in the instancing tab for the replicator, the prototype is the cube. And let's just delete this empty mesh here that we don't need. Okay, the prototype is the cube. The point source is the particle generator. Okay, and what will happen is once we set that up right, I'll come back here to the particle generator and let's try linear, and you can see that now I'm generating those cubes based on those particles. So maybe we want about 20 of these, or maybe even about 40. Let's do about 40 of them, and the length we'll do 2 meters. I don't want any on the Y and I don't want any on the Z, just a length of those. It's almost like I'm duplicating them all the way through. And you see I've got this nice string of cubes, though, based on the particles. Okay, so it's different than an array and a clone in terms of actually copying the objects. You're placing these clones based on these points. Now, you can rotate them like this. You can keyframe them, any one of these. Do something like this. Okay, each one of these values can all be animated, which is really kind of cool. But let's say you wanted to shape this into sort of a DNA type look, Christmas lights, whatever. Well, that's where a radial fall off comes in. Okay, so I can play with my length. So that actually looks really cool. Now, one thing I can also do is press O for my options, go to visibility. I know I was actually in the right one, drawing and control, and under replicators, choose all. And that will allow us to see all of our replicated items. All right, so that's kind of fun. Again, we can play with the different rotation values and just, randomize this some more, kind of like that. But if you come over to the Animate tab, under Deformers, there's Add Falloff Deformer at the top. We hadn't talked about that. You can have a spline fall off. You can have a capsule fall off, a radial, linear. So let's just use a radial fall off, and you'll see that that adds it down at the base. I'm going to scale it, pressing the R key, and as I move it, nothing happens. That's because I need to make sure that that is part of this cube. Okay, so let me just delete this and show you again. So you select the cube first, add Falloff Deformer, radial, and then I can scale it, and now you see it's starting to affect the objects. Now, it's a radial fall off. Now, it's a little confusing at first, but what it's doing is I'm applying basically a radial transform on these objects, but it has a nice fall off to it. It's a deformer. That's all it is. Okay, so I can increase the size of it, move it the other way, negative. And again, this can be animated so that you can be animating those cubes rotating as you're moving this around, making this turn and twist. So think about things growing, and like this clover we just did, how could you apply this to it? DNA structures. You're up inside it, very scientific inside a vein, and you want cells moving, and you want want things growing, you can just be rotating this entire cube itself. Let me get here my transform tools. You can rotate the base cube, which then of course rotates those, and then rotate the fall off. So very powerful stuff once you apply it. So one thing I've always thought about doing is, if you ever go to the movie theater and you see that preview show, and they've got a whole wall of bricks, and each of the bricks are kind of just almost like something's kind of pushing underneath, and each one of them is coming up in a gradual, kind of like a wave. Well, very easy to do with a radial fall off, right, like this. Let's delete this and see what we can do with the others. Let's add another one, and let's come down and put a linear fall off on. Linear fall off, similar to a radial, but this one's square. I'll scale it up, and now look what happens. That's crazy. Okay, now it seems like it's just kind of fun and useless, but there are times when you will want to do some creative graphics, and I'm just using cubes. So imagine you do work with cells and you do work with science, or you need some interesting motion graphics. Perhaps you want to put blobs and streaks and sprites and animate them in a funky kind of way. You can do it with this. But what this linear fall off will do will allow me to just have a fall off applied as a deformer. You can use this fall off in conjunction with the other deformers that I showed you earlier. So rather than applying it as a deformer, you can add this linear fall off and then apply a transform, but then have that fall off. Just quickly, going back to a very basic example of what a fall off is. A fall off is just a way you can control the shape of something. So up here at the very top, and let's come over here to model, you can see it. There's our fall off drop down. I'll choose a linear fall off, like that. Press the R key for scale. And then when we click that scale, we're scaling it more at the top and less at the bottom because of the fall off we applied. Allows you to shape things very, very easily. Allows you to control modeling as well as animation. Okay, so that's the fall offs that have always been in Modo. So that was a linear. And again, to set it, I chose linear, and I just determined I kind of dragged up from the bottom to the top, and the controls for it here where you can reverse the effects. And then I applied any of my transform tools. So take that a step further into our animation and our new set of deformers that we can use. It's that same principle, but just more of them. All right, so just a quick overview on the fall offs. What we're going to do now is get into some more new features, and what I'm actually going to show you how to do is set up a scene using our clover, and how you can use replicators further to make all of those little animated clovers come to life in a scene. And then we're going to set up some lighting, and we're going to put that in, and perhaps we might put a snake through that scene.